The number 8 is about risk management. Basic setup, just establish a risk management KPI. And we spoke about this concept. What percentage of single source suppliers, what percentage of your suppliers are dependent upon you. So if you stop giving them business, will they go bankrupt? And there are various ways of spinning this around. My favorite topic has been these days in terms of exposing the risk is what's the supplier revenue size to what size of business that they're handling for your organization. And if that ratio exceeds 1, then for me, it's alarm bells already, right? And you will be surprised how common that scenario is when you're dealing with, let's say, distributors, when you're dealing with anything which is basically an agent and you're not dealing with the OEMs. So the agents would rely upon margins. So you have to really understand if you're paying your, let's say, the agent in between after 60 days of shipment and the order is a big size, how well can he really fund that assessment, because his payment term may be sooner, right? So always have that lens. But that's for the basic team. Do your risk management. You can add supply concentration in there. You can have category concentration, basically how much reliant you are on that supplier. So for example, if you're dealing with a single source vendor who is basically having a patent or having the monopoly, you are having 100% reliance. So what will happen if that product is suddenly shoots up by 200%? Would you really pay 200% to that supplier, or would you shut down that product line? This is how basically the risk management works. People would also bring in the elements of measuring macroeconomics, geopolitics, all these buzzwords. And in my view, most of these things are reactionary. You can't really predict any geopolitical macroeconomic factors. So all these are good for discussions, but they don't really model up in any kind of action, right? It's good talk, what I call it as a water cooler chat, right? But it doesn't really translate into action. People will not issue out POs based upon gossips. So while you can have that kind of a discussion, as I said, as a water cooler chat, but for anything meaningful, you really have to factor in the elements which you can control and take actions on. So for example, risk management, I will have cybersecurity for top 1% teams. How vulnerable your suppliers are to a cybersecurity attack. So your suppliers are now more exposed towards this cybersecurity attacks, right? So to what extent, if the cybersecurity attack happens, your supplier will lose the ability to ship the product, or you will lose the confidential data, and what will the impact? This is what I will, let's say, manage as a risk, because it can happen anytime. I've already spoken about nearshoring percentages. I would probably add it here to what percent of your total shipments or spend you're able to bring under the nearshoring, meaning the domestic shipments versus the overseas shipment. When I talk about domestic shipment, I am not saying buy domestically. We will cover that KPI later. What I'm basically saying is force your supplier to establish local warehouses and force them to keep the product there, which is not on your books, but you can make a phone call and ask them to ship it out in hours rather than through a transit vessel, which takes 30 days on average, right? The last thing I would add in the risk management, and again, we have covered this, but I will state it out again, is contracts at risk. So all your troublemaker suppliers, single source, monopolistic suppliers, poor performance suppliers, suppliers in risky areas, if I use the words loosely, to what percent of these contracts are at risk, and what can you do to, let's say, reduce that percentage spend? So if you have 5% of your spend with the troublemakers, can you reduce it to 3%? This is how top 1% team will continue to work.